My parents. I was born and raised in the riverine region of the Mekong Delta, Vietnam. My family was not wealthy. We were a family of 6, my parents, 1 older sister, and 3 older brothers. Being the youngest, I was loved more than my siblings. Because we were poor, my parents had to work from dawn to dusk to provide for our education. Back then, I was young and didn't fully understand our financial situation, so I often asked for various things. However, my parents tried their best to meet my demands by taking on extra work. As time passed, I grew up amidst the hardships of my parents. Unable to pay my school fees, my parents had to do heavy labor for others. One day, my mother climbed a tree to pick fruits and was bitten all over by ants because the owner didn't allow her to use a basket, fearing the fruits would get bruised and fetch less money. Despite the ants biting her, my mother persevered to finish picking the fruits, hoping to earn enough money for our education. I will never forget these images throughout my life. Eventually, I finished high school and went to Saigon to take the university entrance exam. I passed and got into a college. On the day I started school, my mother had to borrow money for me to go to Saigon. Holding 300,000 VND in my hand, my heart ached. I will always remember the sight of my thin mother seeing me off at the bus station. She quickly gave me a sandwich, while she herself ate a 500 VND sticky rice. Sitting on the bus, I couldn't hold back my tears. The image of my mother eating dry sticky rice choked me up. I made a promise to myself that I would study hard and find a job to cover my living expenses and tuition. But little did I know that a few days after I left, my mother also came to Saigon to find a job to support my education. She worked as a maid for someone else's house, and when she received her monthly salary, she didn't give it to me directly but sent it through relatives, because she didn't want me to know she was in Saigon. I rarely go home to visit my parents because I often get carsick. But that's just the reason I tell people. In reality, I miss home, miss my father, miss my mother, but because I don't have money, I have to stay away. Then I also managed to save enough money to go home to visit my parents. Wanting to surprise my family, I didn't announce my arrival. That night when I got home, standing outside the gate, I saw the house was deserted. I walked into the house and saw my father eating dinner alone. His dinner was cold rice soaked in boiling water with a little salt for a salty taste, easy to eat, my child. In Saigon, I still have fried tofu, vegetables to boil. But at home, my parents eat like this. How? I couldn't hold back my tears and hugged my father tightly. When I asked where my mother was, my father told me all about my mother going to Saigon to work. At that time, I blamed my siblings for not helping so that my parents wouldn't have to suffer, but I didn't know that my siblings' families were also struggling. I returned to Saigon following the address my father gave to find my mother. I didn't let my mother work anymore because now I also had a job. I could afford food, rent, just asked the family for a little more tuition. 3 years passed quickly. I graduated and had a stable job. I could support my parents every month. Every time I sent money home, my father would call. "Parents, thank you." It was because of that sentence from my father that I cried. I remember the time my mother was bitten by ants and swelled up. I remember my father's dinner soaked in salt water. I remember the months my mother worked as a maid for others. My parents sacrificed everything for me, so my meager salary today is nothing.